We have found one of the weirdest, most obscure children's shows that I am pretty sure most of you have never even heard of. A puppet-based sci-fi series called Brats of the Lost Nebula. I absolutely loved the Dark Crystal film, a movie from Jim Henson that managed to do a full narrative based around puppets. Outside of the Dark Crystal, there are very few attempts to use puppets in a serious way though, save for advanced animatronics and otherwise live-action films. Most puppets are used for the sake of comedy, such as with the sitcom Dinosaurs, which I also loved, or The Muppets, or for really young children like with Sesame Street. In 1998, however, the Jim Henson Company created a puppet-based sci-fi show for kids that was intended to be a more serious use of the medium. Like Dark Crystal, it was aimed at kids, but was designed to be a more dramatic story. The show put together 13 episodes for Kids WB, but it was removed after only 3 episodes aired, with the remaining 10 only being seen in Canada before disappearing for 20 years when the episodes would come to ROKU, which is why we're able to watch it now. This will be the first in a series of videos talking about different cartoons, both good and terrible, that happen to get canceled after only one season. If there's a particular canceled cartoon you'd like us to talk about, go on over to our Patreon. We have a $10 a month tier that lets you decide which video we do next on this topic. We're also open to other topics for the record. And now, on to the video. The Dark Crystal was a back-breaking production, and an expensive one at that. It was an absolute work of art from Jim Henson that did some crazy experimental things, even after cuts demanded from the distributor to try and make it friendly for kids. This later show, Brats of the Lost Nebula, seemed to be a cheap imitation, a children's TV series using very simple puppets and terrible CGI. I expected to get through the series and make a video about what a disaster the show was, but I'm frankly surprised to say it was one of the best things I got to watch this year. The show follows 5 alien children who are stranded on a planetoid together after their home planets were destroyed by an alien force known as the Shock. The 2 main characters, Zadam and his sister Triply, are essentially humans, which is honestly a bit of a disappointment, at least at first. Humanoid puppets rarely look good. Even species like Gelflings from the Dark Crystal, which are just human-like, can often look very fake compared to the more alien species because humans are used to seeing other humans move and speak. It's just hard to trick audiences into thinking humanoid things are real, as opposed to animals, which we have a lot less experience looking at, especially their little details. The other alien children aren't much different. All of them are basically humans with small variations to them. Duncan is just a human, but really big. Ryle is just a blue human with a horn. And Lavana is just a fairy or elf goth girl, but still basically human. To explore some crazy designs like the Skeksis were in the Dark Crystal would have been a wiser choice in terms of visuals, though it would possibly be far less relatable to children watching the show. The focal villain in the show is Vygar, a sort of commander within the Shock, but even he answers to a higher power known as the Masters, some creepy faces that appear on his magic mirror and tell him what to do. Until the start of the show, it's implied that Vygar is there to destroy planets, but they're not really concerned about the survivors escaping in ships or pods, yet in this particular instance of killing Triply and Zadam's home planet, the Masters are insisting that they need to destroy the tiny planetoid and the 5 children that escaped to it. Vygar questions the Master's motives and tries to work perpendicular to them, trying to capture the children and investigate the planet so he can figure out why the Masters find it so special, without intending to work against them in the meantime. The planetoid travels through space when it is being attacked, and later the kids find some broken down fighter ships and repair them to help better fight Vygar and his robots. The kids realize that the planetoid has some sort of consciousness to it, and it's also part machine, meaning there is a bigger mystery at hand, further solidifying Vygar's curiosity about the planetoid and why the Masters want it destroyed. I mentioned earlier that the show was pulled from the schedule after only 3 episodes, and frankly, I can see why. The first 3 episodes are definitely the worst in the series. They are mostly just plot-driven, with the characters not showing any real depth or exploration. The problems are generally solved fast and in uninteresting ways before the end of the episode, and it tries way too hard to do things that the writers think will be cool to children but just aren't, such as using giant tunnels as slides for long sequences where all we see is the characters acting excited about it, or flying spaceships. The pandering to children reaches its height in the third episode climax, where Vigar has a realization that he has no childhood, no memories before working for the Shock, and states that without a past, he can't have a future. This feels like it's going to set up some really stupid themes about what childhood is and why it's important, but it actually sets up really genius themes about what childhood is and why it's important. After episode 3, the show suddenly skyrockets in writing quality, which is not unheard of. A lot of shows struggle to find their footing in the writer's room, particularly when they're bound to a particular medium like puppets, where it's hard to figure out how to make a moment properly land, but they start to figure it out as the show progresses. Episode 4 brings us new alien species, ones designed to look not as human as the others we've seen so far, and it's absolutely wonderful. Not being restrained to human designs make their mannerisms feel more real, or at least more interesting to look at instead of jarring. The episode also gives us our first real character-centric story, with Levana having lost her ability to fly, her wings just seemingly no longer existing. Duncan, her techno friend, builds her robotic wings, but it's just too depressing for her, and she instead chooses to give up her free will to an alien to turn her brain off so she doesn't have to deal with the pain. In the end, she of course realizes that this is wrong, and it sets up the formula for what future episodes will be about. Each child has lost their home planet and family, and their arcs become about dealing with loss, with more tangible things like Levana's wings being a vehicle to explore that. In the end, Levana doesn't get her wings back, but instead she chooses to embrace the metal wings that were built for her, signaling an important aspect of the series, continuity and real growth. It isn't like other children's shows, or even adult shows at the time, where an episode ends with everything returning to the norm, where the episodes could be played out of order and you wouldn't really notice anything. She continues to use these metal wings in future episodes, and other small elements begin to recur as well. New characters are added to the cast, new technology that the children build are continually used in future episodes, and the dynamics really do feel like they change as the characters grow. As I mentioned earlier, the show becomes a rather genius discussion about what childhood is and what it means. The title Brats of the Lost Nebula felt like it was pandering to kids by putting a word like brats in the title, but it actually takes on a very nuanced meaning in the show. Since the kids are all dealing with loss of their family and their home and being pushed into a war, they're also dealing with the loss of their childhoods. A lot of stories use this sort of plot to talk about kids being forced to grow up early, but this show doesn't take it that far, or rather, it takes it a step further. While the kids are growing up, they are still kids. Being in a war doesn't make a 10-year-old an adult, but it doesn't let them be an actual child either. Instead, brat becomes a term used by the characters, both good and bad, to describe these 5 orphans who are not adults but are no longer children either. I think the most beautiful example of this comes in an episode that focuses on Zadam's little sister, Triply. In episode 5, she sees an abandoned ship might contain her parents, or at least other people from her species, and she leaves her brother and the other orphans behind to go investigate it. While there, she finds this beautiful children's music box and has a little breakdown, crying about how she doesn't want to be a brat anymore, a term that is basically used to describe the children who have become soldiers, children who had their childhoods taken away, yet aren't adults either. When a robot appears, she drops the music box and it shatters, symbolizing to me how this invasion caused these children to let go of their childhoods. She defeats the robot and sees the remains of the music box. While shattered, it is not completely destroyed. It is no longer the beautiful childhood toy, but that doesn't erase it either. Like Triply herself, who still has that sliver of her childhood left, even if only in the very literal sense that she is only 10 years old. In the end, she walks away, questioning why a brat would need the remains of a music box, indicating that these children have been so affected by this war that anything related to their childhood, their real childhood, is no longer of any use to them. The following episodes feature similar stories and themes to this one, with a lot of serious deconstruction of these kids and the journeys they've been on, and how hopeless it can feel to be lost in space like they are. It still manages to make jokes, and some of the episodes are more humor-based than action, but overall it tells a very serious and almost gritty story. Most episodes tend to focus on one particular character at a time, and I think this is where the show really shines. Even when they aren't doing a gritty tale about the loss of childhood, these are fun characters to be around, and each serves an important role in the group. Levana is a psychic elf who doesn't like violence or fighting, but her psychic abilities help her translate the universe around them for the Brats. Ryle is an evil little twerp, but he brings an edge to the group that stops it from being too chummy and helps with more physical combat. Duncan is big, but his real strength is his intelligence, creating machines that aren't used as a quick way to resolve problems, but rather to explore subplots and can be used again in future episodes to streamline the writing. And Triply, oh my god, Triply is just amazing from front to back. I already described her arc giving up her previous ideas of childhood, but she's just never not amazing. Just look at some of these clips.
You frighten and amaze me.
Yeah, that's my gig.
I think Duncan may have a problem.
Yeah! It's 10 years old and wants her dolly back!
She's just a sarcastic little genius, and she's funny, and that's another thing the show does really well in my opinion. It's comedy. While some of its humor is awful, even its really childish humor can be twisted to almost ironic levels. There's one alien who is referred to as Mr. Poopy Butt by the children, and it seems really childish, and the show points that out. But then it gets brought back later in the episode in more tongue-in-cheek ways by the villain. A lot of these jokes are playful uses of existing words that combine 90s lingo with alienish syntax that keeps you engaged in the story because they're not just saying exactly what needs to be said to move the scene forward. It treats the audience like they're intelligent enough to catch up on their particular way of talking, even though it's aimed at kids, and this isn't the only way it treats kids as intelligent. It also does so by moving the plot forward on an episodic basis, something that wasn't even big in television for adults at the time. Vygar himself sees further development every episode or two, so instead of setting up a plot, exploring side stories for 12 episodes, and then answering everything in the finale, we see a lot of these stories progress over the course of the show. Vygar begins to realize that he has some part of him that cares for these children for reasons he doesn't understand, and something about the planetoid is very familiar to him. He begins to question his existence as a whole because of it. As I mentioned earlier, he has no memories before working for the Shock, and he doesn't actually understand what they do. They destroy entire planets for seemingly no reason, but they shock the planets out of existence as a giant eye appears above it to watch, one attached to a strange machine. And Vygar doesn't understand why this eye is watching these planets be destroyed. He learns that he's in fact a species from another nebula so distant that it is practically another dimension. The entire nebula was destroyed by the Masters, but he and his species, the Artisans, created the planetoid to help protect the next one. This planetoid can use children to help fight the Masters because their sense of imagination makes them unpredictable, and the Masters seemingly are driven by logic. Vygar is given a chance to reject his evil ways when he's confronted by the spirit of his good self that remains inside of the planetoid, but in the end he decides to delete it. While doing this, the kids are out in space trying to stop another planet from being destroyed, and they manage to do it by attacking the machine that seemingly controls the giant eye, instead of the ships that are actually destroying the planet. Thanks to Levana, who is psychic, we learn that this eye is a sort of cosmic being that was trapped in the machine by the Masters. They feed off of sadness, and forcing this eye to watch countless planets die with all of their species being wiped out brings the maximum amount of grief, which explains why they didn't really care if people made it away on escape pods. It was more about just making this eye cry as opposed to stopping these planets from fighting back. The Shock is essentially disassembled by this action, but Vygar is still out there, as are the Masters. In the end, Duncan manages to reunite with his grandpa, but the other Brats have not found their parents yet, meaning there are places for the story to go in Season 2. But since it was removed from the schedule after just 3 episodes, it never got the chance to do that. The show was cancelled by the WB because they were doing pretty poorly in relation to other children's programming blocks at the same time. In an attempt to cut costs, they decided to do away with third-party programming they had acquired like Brats of the Lost Nebula, and instead aired only content they owned the whole rights to gain more of the profits. And while this may have been the final reason why it never went anywhere, it was still getting low ratings itself while on the air, so might not have gotten a Season 2 anyways, and I can understand why. Despite my praise for the later episodes, they do have their issues. While the filming style moved to be a lot more cinematic and made better use of the limitations of the puppets, it can still feel stifled by its lack of wide shots and overuse of close-ups. While the plots certainly get cooler, a lot of what happens in the finale is packed in so tight that it's an unceremonious exposition dump, with little beauty in these dramatic moments. The humor can be really well done too, but some of it can also be really simple and childish. Humor that even children will look at and cringe. And beyond that, it's still just, well, puppets. Puppets as a storytelling medium have always struggled to be taken seriously, and I think if I had found this as a kid, I might not have enjoyed it so much either, finding the puppet aspect to be weird. I can't help but believe that if the show was made today, though, with modern cinematography, digital equipment, and cleaner effects, it might actually be successful. But we've already seen this in the wildly more popular Dark Crystal revival, and even that is having trouble getting a second season renewal despite being released quite a while ago from Netflix. So maybe it's just wishful thinking, something that I myself and others like me might find very interesting, but not something that could survive in today's market, whether for kids or for adults. But I do recommend you guys go check it out. It is available on Roku. I believe they have free trial offers as well, so please try and watch the show wherever you can. It really is one of the most unique things I've ever seen in every aspect of its production. That's all I have for you guys today. Thanks for watching. If there are other more obscure cartoons or children's shows you'd like us to review, leave a comment down below and maybe we'll check it out and make a video. See you next time!